Purple. A lot of purple. Purple guy. Tight. All right. Let me see where I'm at. Do you believe in shit? Let me rephrase. Are you crazy enough to believe in anything? Belief, meaning an acceptance of something as true or existing. I, for one, believe in smart work, not hard work. I knew I was going to burp. I believe smart work is hard work without the unnecessary fatigue that comes with our outdated views on labor as a concept. But again, that's my belief. To be honest, it feels kind of scary to believe in anything nowadays. Our society does a great job at pulling any and everything into question. This in and of itself is not terrible. However, there's also this inclination to imply extremes to everything. While I sense the danger this quality presents our collective ability to cooperate, there's a feeling of numbness that I more often than not resign myself to as a comfort against these warring extremes. This is also dangerous. I see that, but I don't have any answers to it that I think you'll like. But, such is life. Welcome to The.MAZIST. I'm your host, Christopher, and today we'll be discussing belief in the age of hyper anything. If the only hyper thing you know is hyperpop, I don't think you'd argue with me when I say that the genre is, generally speaking, a byproduct of the emotional state conducted about ourselves in this hyper-realized time in the West. We are thrown into consistent feeds of the coldest sarcasms and tragedies, the boiling point surrealism of the boiling point surrealism of memes and rage-inducing comments under the posts we have little, if any, relation to, simply by association, or worse, our habit of consumption. You feel me? If you need a basis for the condition I'm talking about, hyper simply means over or above, and it conveys excess or extremes. We exist in a collective state where, in order to survive, we have to adopt certain extremes of attitude or otherwise, and move in a way which grants us dominance over those against us. This is the hyper-realized machine of late-stage capitalism at its finest, causing seemingly everyone to adapt to their extreme, highest selves just to perform in its cogs seamlessly. The problem with this is that extremities leave us numb or lightheaded, both physically and figuratively. It is not sustainable, but it is attractive. Believe me, it's very attractive. But why? I think extremity is attractive because it feigns movement. It gives us an illusion of action and righteousness, so much so that we'd be willing to go to war with the other extreme given the right direction and resources. But the genius of this Western structure is the implantation of so many different spectrums of conceptual polarity that we're effectively discombobulated and without orientation to our own sense of truth. Whichever side your Reels or TikTok falls under is going to be spun in a dizzying flurry of information corroborating that side, with a few pieces that just remind you of who, or more aptly, what you're against. You know what I'm saying? We like the idea of being on one side or the other because the differences are more often than not presented as a moral or social difference that appeals to our ego. And our egos live for separation. Thus, it is relatively easy to be on either side of a spectrum depending on the circumstance. There is a safety to being vindicated in a sense. To mediate, or better put, to consider both sides is a harder task only meant for those with the privilege to be rational enough to remain neutral. I mean for y'all to discern when I say privilege, as it is a gift to be able to be neutral and objective, but it is available to most, if not all, through training. But honestly, that that might honestly be asking too much, given most people's temperament when it comes to like being told about the world or themselves for that matter. Like, who am I? At the end of the day. But the ability to discern is an unfortunate corpse in the war of extremes, in the condition of hyperstates. But I think that these extremes can be minimized in the microcosm by realizing they are a false representation of absolutes. Now, what do I mean by absolutes? To start, let us explore absolutism, which considers the state of truth as being universal, without change across humanity and our natures. In logic, you could argue for absolutism by saying the very structure of reason and discourse assumes absolutes via the law of non contradiction. In order to make a sound and valid argument, there needs to be little to no contradiction in your statements. And I'm giving grace here because a good debater finds holes in everything. But if all truth were relative, the ability for rational discourse collapses with no ground to stabilize on. I'll also note that the phrase all truth is relative is in fact an absolute. So there's that key contradiction. But it is also key to note that without a sense for universal standards or universal truths such as human rights, we couldn't condemn slavery, oppression, and other tragedies that befall us throughout our history and present day. For more nuance, cross-cultural dialogue also needs universal frameworks to establish a common ground for resolving conflict. Now, on the other side of the spectrum is relativism. The points in favor are as follows. Human knowledge is a filtered, accumulated phenomenon. It is an amalgamation of language shifts and translations, cultural contexts, psychology, and most fallible of all, our own senses. This can be seen in our hyper-realized scientific endeavor. Innovation and paradigm shifts have frequently rebuilt before held absolute truths in the name of pushing us forward as a species. And that really lets us know that sometimes we have to disregard the convention or the mass accepted truth in favor of the discoveries which complicate but orient us better in the bigger picture. You feel me? Further, absolutism fails to acknowledge morality as fundamentally a human construct, expressed in degrees throughout socio-political history and cultural priorities. Now, this is where it gets real interesting because the priorities of power structures often hide behind universal truths to venerate their own dominance. Foucault said a few things to that point. Heinous acts, imperialism, slavery, and oppression have been justified in this very vein. You see where the extremities fall apart, Hyper-realized systems like capitalism fear the involvement of other potential systems in its dimension of operation because it fears collapse or incoherence. The mode of operations practice creates a false sense of security, in this case, because the ones propagating such a mode are safe and well-fed at the top. They currently have the true ultimate say in governing operations, but that's a convo for another day. I'm not going to get into that right now. What's important to understand for this discussion is that the priorities can become skewed for the individual when the absolute is pushed in their face with no option to breathe. So, where does belief play into this? I'm going to get into that. How do we as people, but really as individuals, decide to believe in something when our options leave us cold and numb or hot and flustered in a never-ending conflict? Recognize, things are rarely so black and white that to choose one extreme over the other absolves you of the responsibility to consider the other end. What I mean here is to consider the maxim that opposites are identical in nature but different to degree. To whatever degree you reside, the grounding principle is to recognize the pendulum swinging in both directions and to be moderate in the movement, Flow with it, not allowing yourself to be thrown into disequilibrium by shutting out the inevitable swing in your perception. That only leads to ignorance. This is becoming my catchphrase at this point, but practice discernment with what I'm saying here. Moderation as balance practiced in multiple dimensions of our society would probably do us well. But our current climate makes even considering the other end a taboo, especially when it doesn't corroborate our reality. And that attitude is dangerous for our ability to critically think. You feel me? There is a fine line to practicing moderation among the extremity and playing devil's advocate for the sake of rage baiting, or worse, denying the common ground in favor of posturing. We got to do better as a generation in this practice of building community with our people. Moderation is not bad, but it has little to nothing, I repeat, little to nothing to do with being a moderate politically. That is not part of our discussion today. A lot of people might see what I'm talking about, like moderation. What do you mean moderate? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you think. I'm not gonna project on you, but like, bro, we can't. Moderation is not bad. Moderation is not bad. It is my fear that no matter what I say, people will take it into politics anyway. But I stress that this is a philosophical, social, but also emotional discussion for the individual. I think in terms of millennials and Gen Z, we are only as radical as our emotional states. You feel me? Let me repeat. We are only as radical as our emotional states. No wonder there's dissatisfaction, loneliness, and mental discord at an all-time high right now. We don't recognize our opposites as keys in our light and dark we must contend with to make color. We just want to win, feel good, feel numb, no matter who or what we have to run through the ringer to exploit. That in of itself is faulty. You feel me? Belief. I want to bring this back to belief. Belief at the end of the day is the individual's choice. And moderation, not extremity, is how we make that choice well. The earlier comparison and contrast between absolutism and relativism was to show you that both have merits in their different expressions. But to summarize, we must find our degrees within these spectrums, these polarities, to make our own picture of what is, or better yet, what could be. You feel me? See only absolutes and you'll only find separation, isolation, and numbness. See no real basis of truth to discern what is, and things lose their meaning, causing separation, isolation, and numbness. See that and move forward with discernment among the hyper everything of the world. Don't allow yourself to be swung by the metaphorical waves. Anchor, ground yourself, and navigate this maze. If you listen to this whole thing, I just want to say thank you. This channel is in its early development and relies on viewers like you to see what works, what resonates, and, discard the rest. You feel me? If you want more videos like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. I really want to talk with you guys. I want to connect. Follow my links in the description box. I got my blog. I got my music. And, as always, Maze out. Peace.